John Alexander Dowie is called an apostle and a revivalist by Roberts Liardon in his book God's Generals. But as we're going to see, Dowie was no apostle. He was a con man and a murderer. And we're going to be talking about the dozens of victims who died under Dowie's care. The episode is called Dowie's Den of Death. You're going to want to keep watching. John Alexander Dowie, 1847 to 1907, was an extremely popular faith healer in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He was constantly featured in newspapers across the country for his supposed healing abilities. People from all over the world would come to hear Dowie speak and receive healing from him. The stages at his meetings had crutches and canes lined up in the front as a testimony of all the alleged healings that took place under his ministry. He established healing homes in the Chicago area where people could stay, be prayed for, and possibly be healed. Of course, in order for them to receive their healing and to keep it, they had to have faith in Dowie's ability, and they had to tithe to Dowie's ministry. Sound familiar?
To give that same amount. If God is speaking to you to sow $1,000 seeds tonight, I want to lay hands on your envelope.
I like new money. I don't know if you do, but I hate old money that's wrinkled and dirty and got all the diseases on it. I like new money.
That word's not for everyone, but it's a particular person. You should have moved a long time ago. You're missing it, and your family's suffering by it. That's a word. As surely as I'm speaking by the Spirit of God, that is a word for a person right now. That is God penetrating your heart. It's burning on the inside of you, and you need to make a vow of faith of $1,000. Oh, Bob, couldn't you say 25? No!
Dowie founded the Christian Catholic Church and was made the general overseer. It wasn't long before Dowie had accumulated enough wealth from his tithing followers to buy himself a beautiful carriage with a handsome pair of horses, a large tabernacle, a printing house, and a sanitarium, which he called a hospital. You see, Dowie taught that doctors and the medical establishment were evil, and that people should rely only on the Lord for healing. He also taught that sickness and insanity were a cause of sin and the devil. His hospital, where the sick and insane received no medical treatment at all, soon became a public nuisance, and a series of legal proceedings began against Dowie. Well, what did Dowie do? Dowie cleverly posed as a victim of persecution to his followers, and he talked them into buying a piece of property once known as the Imperial Hotel. And you know what he renamed it? He renamed it Zion, and he pronounced it the new headquarters by advertising it all over the country. In a short time, other buildings were purchased, and it wasn't long before his followers purchased a tract of land near Waukegan, Illinois, and an entire city called Zion City was built. Dowie was living in the lap of luxury. The Christian Catholic Church by this time was claiming 10,000 members, and Dowie was receiving tithes from each of them. It's reported that Dowie had such a devotion from his followers that they would prefer death rather than to lose their faith. Yet the man who called himself the reincarnation of the prophet Elijah was not just receiving attention by the papers for his extravagant lifestyle or his delusions of grandeur. The many deaths that took place under Dowie's supervision were being reported all over the world. Men, women, and children who could have been saved if they had only received medical attention died at the hands of the Dowieites. One example is the wife of H. Worthington Judd. Judd was one of Dowie's most prominent officers. He gave the report to the authorities that his wife did not want medical treatment, and that even if she did, he would not have given it to her. That is the kind of control that Dowie had on his followers. she died under the most distressing circumstances. It was unanimous by several physicians that she could have been saved had she had seen a doctor. Then we have the example of Annetta Flanders, who died of blood poisoning. Miss Flanders was taken to the hospital, but it was too late. And as usual, rather than take responsibility for her death, the Dowieites blamed the hospital, saying that if they would have left the woman with them, she would not have died. We're going to take a look at both of these cases, along with a few others. But I want to warn you, the details in these stories are extremely gruesome. Okay, so here we are. I've got the first article that I want to show you up on my computer screen. And again, if you look at the top left-hand side of the screen, here you see that we are on newspapers.com. And the name of the paper that we're going to be looking at is the Chicago Daily Tribune. Let me zoom in here so you can see the date. Okay, so there you go, right at the top, Friday, April 27th, and look at that, 1894. All right, this is the article we're going to be looking at. Let me just zoom in here again so you can see it more clearly, and we can look at this together. So the article's called Dies in Dowie's Den. Now, there are dozens and dozens of articles that are similar to this, from 1894 all the way up through the early 1900s before Zion fell. There are so many reports of people who died under Dowie's care. There's absolutely no way that we can look at every single article. We'll be here for hours, but I will tell you we're going to look at 5 or 6 because there is some really, not just information about the deaths that occurred, but the information about Dowie's own attitude towards these deaths and his luxurious lifestyle and the money that he had. And there's just a lot of information surrounding the articles that talk about these deaths. So we're going to look at 5 or 6. So this is the first one. Dies in Dowie's Den. Homer Harrison succumbs under miraculous treatment. Unfortunate boy suffering with a tumor is brought to John Alexander's home and dies. His parents were told by doctors that his disease was incurable, but they came to Dowie in spite of this. President of the Divine Healing Association will not talk. All right, let's look at the article. Homer Harrison died Wednesday at number 6036 Edgerton Avenue. What makes the circumstance noteworthy is the fact that number 6036 Edgerton Avenue is the home of the Reverend John Alexander Dowie, president of the International Divine Healing Association. So again, this is before Zion City was built. I believe Zion City was built in between 1900. I think that's when the plans were actually where the plans were made public. I believe that the city itself was built in 1901, though. So this is well before that. Anyway, the Reverend John Alexander Dowie, as readers of the Tribune have already been informed, spends his entire time telling credulous people about the miraculous powers over sickness and death he possesses. Indeed, he is kept so busy telling about his ability as a miracle worker that he has no time to work any miracles. But he does somehow contrive to find time to pocket the free will offerings. Now remember, as I said in the intro, Dowie demanded that those who followed him tithe directly to him. This says free will offerings, but he does live off of the tithes of his followers. Homer Harrison was 8 years old and the son of Reverend and Miss S.J. Harrison of Newark, Illinois. Homer had been afflicted for a long time with a huge tumor on his right side and smaller ones on his throat. His parents had placed him under the care of a number of physicians, one after another, but they declared his malady was incurable and that death would soon calm him. Convinced at last that no help could be hoped for from physicians, the parents brought him 3 weeks ago to Dowie's headquarters. There they remained until Wednesday evening, when they left for their home with the remains of their boy. Dowie deluded them into believing what they were so willing to believe, that their boy was improving all the time until he died. Folks, Dowie was a con man, and he was after people's money. I mean, that's just, you're going to see this as we go through these articles. This is just the first. You're going to see more just like this as we move forward. They clung so tenaciously to hope that they had no room for doubts. They did not stop to think that if the Reverend John Alexander Dowie possessed the miraculous power he claimed, he could have cured the boy in 3 seconds as well as in 3 weeks. They did not stop to reflect that while the Reverend John Alexander Dowie was continually telling them about the innumerable tumors he had cured instantly, those upon their boy's body remained after 3 weeks under the touch of this miraculous healer. They stayed on, the size of their free will offering growing with each day. They stayed on until death blighted their hopes. So now we're going to look at a section of this article that talks about a reporter trying to go and see Dowie. And Dowie's not happy about this. So let's look at this section here. The reporter's going to see him to ask about the death of this young boy. The Reverend John Alexander Dowie was not in a particular amiable mood yesterday. Either his liver was somewhat out of order, or the sum total of yesterday's free will offerings was not up to the average. The easy chairs and other articles necessary to the physical comfort of miracle workers were in process of removal to the Lincoln apartment house, a dozen doors north, which has been leased by the International Divine Healing Association, which is the Reverend John Alexander Dowie's other name for 2 years, to the intense disgust of John Alexander's neighbors. It required fully 5 minutes vigorous ringing to bring anyone to the door. So the reporter's out there ringing the bell, ringing the bell, ringing the bell. Finally, a young man poked his head out to say that the Reverend John Alexander Dowie was too exceedingly busy to see anyone whatever. Means were found to convince the young man that Mr. Dowie might make an exception to his rule. The young man went to John Alexander Dowie's office to inquire, and a reporter followed at his heels. John Alexander, who was engrossed with a package of circulars setting forth his own miraculous powers, looked up with a frown at the interruption. The frown deepened at sight of the stranger. He rose to his feet. "I am exceedingly busy just now." "Was there a death in the house yesterday?" John Alexander instantly flared into a passion. He started toward the front door. "What right have you to ask such a question?" he demanded. "Who was it?" John Alexander's hand, trembling with rage, was on the doorknob. "What right have you to question me? Who are you?" "I am a reporter for the Tribune. Wasn't yesterday your day for working miracles?" But the slamming of the front door was so violently that the glass jingled. But the slamming of the front door so violently that the glass jingled was the only answer. John Alexander's neighbors were more willing to talk. They were unanimous in expressing the hope that John Alexander might be shown up so thoroughly that the stream of free will offerings would cease to flow into his coffers, so he would be obliged to work for a living. Especially fervent were they in expressing wishes that John Alexander Dowie would get out of the neighborhood. In several of his experience meetings, cases have been cited by Dowie in which tumors of many years' existence vanished. No one knows where within a few hours after he laid his magic hand on the afflicted spot. That's the end of the article. So here is the second article that I wanted to show you. And once again, it's the Chicago Daily Tribune, and we are on newspapers.com. Let me zoom in again so you can see the date. Here we go. Let me move it up here. Right there in the middle, Tuesday, July 2nd, 1895. So it's about a year later. And we're going to be looking at this article right here, which has a similar title to the last article we looked at, Dies in Dowie's Den. It's a little bit different. I want to show you this because what happens when people die under Dowie's care is he tries to get rid of the body. And remember, the same thing happened with the Paramites. When the Paramite killings occurred, they tried to remove Letitia Greenhoff's body before anybody could find out about it. So it's the same thing. And Dowie's the one who started all that. Dowie tried to do that himself, but he gets caught here. In a few minutes, we're going to be looking at another article, and this is really an interesting article because we're going to be looking at an article where a newspaper reporter goes and visits a businessman who has his establishment right across the street from Dowie's headquarters. And the businessman noticed a hearse that was kind of strategically parked just far away down the street from Dowie's establishment, right, where the businessman could see it. And he got so irritated that he finally went out and confronted the driver of the hearse and ran the driver off. But he got some good information. We're going to be looking at that article here shortly. But let's check this one out. Let's zoom in so we can read it together. All right. Dies in Dowie's Den. Body of unknown inmate is removed at night. See, there it is. Sneaky. Really sneaky. Taken to the morgue. Police learn it is to be shipped away in the morning. They notify the coroner. Investigation of the mysterious case will be made. An alleged death certificate. So let's zoom in a little more there so we can see. Dowie's institution on Edgerton Avenue near 16th Street will undergo another investigation at the hands of the coroner this morning. Last night, shortly before 11 o'clock, Frank I. Bennett, who lives on Edgerton Avenue near the institution, noticed an undertaker's wagon standing in front of the home, number 1, 620 Edgerton Avenue. He watched and soon saw a body brought from the house and put in the wagon. Jumping on his bicycle, he followed the wagon to Ralston's Undertaking Establishment, number 5437 Lake Avenue. The attendant there refused to give any information, and Mr. Bennett informed Lieutenant Lavin of the Hyde Park Police Station of what had taken place. The lieutenant sent Sergeant Mullen to the undertakers with Mr. I think is that Bennett? Boonett, maybe. I'm not sure. It's B-E-U there. Anyway, but that officer's authority was not sufficient to bring forth any information concerning the body, except that it was to be shipped east in the morning, and that Dr. Spacer, and we're going to be reading a good amount about this guy here, Dr. Spacer, Dowie's assistant, had issued a death certificate which the undertaker considered sufficient authority for removing the body. Inspector Hunt was notified of the case and gave it his personal attention. He succeeded no better in obtaining information concerning the identity of the body than had Sergeant Mullen, and he notified Coroner McHale of the facts in the case. The coroner ordered preparation for shipment to cease and said he would visit the undertaking establishment on Lake Avenue at 9 o'clock in the morning and investigate the case. Dr. Spacer said last night that the body was that of Miss Magdalene. Is that Bunk? I'm not sure. That's kind of, as you can see, it's kind of whited out there, of Berlin, Canada. He said heart disease had caused her death. He claimed to have authority from the Department of Health to issue death certificates and denied that there was anything irregular in the case. The body was taken from the home late because it was not decided that what disposition should be made of it until late in the evening. All right, so that's pretty much it. All I wanted to show you in this article, because the rest of this is about the neighbors' complaints about Dowie. So, but anyway, Dowie, we're going to see stuff like this throughout. Dowie trying to hide the deaths that occurred under his care, and we'll see more stuff like this as we move on. Okay, so here we are once again. I've got the next article up, article number 3. We're again at newspapers.com. We are looking at the Evening Star. This is from Washington, the District of Columbia. The date, Monday, July 31st, 1899. So we're moving on in the years. We started our first look at the Dowie deaths in 1894. The last article was in 1895. This is 1899, and we're going to be looking at the death of Annetta Flanders. So let's do that now. This is the article here. Down here, let me just zoom in so we can read this together. And it's just really sad. You're looking at these people who were duped into believing that Dowie had this great power from God to heal them. And all he wanted was their money, which, by the way, is what every single faith healer wants. Okay? Listen, folks, these faith healers do not care about you. They don't care about your problems or, your suffering. What they care about is your money. And this goes way back, because men are just, they're just greedy. And so this just is nothing, it's nothing new. These guys don't care about you. All they care about is getting your money, robbing you. And that's what they're about. And Dowie was no different. And like I said, these are really, really sad stories. Died from neglect. Patient of divine healing denied even a bowl of broth. A special to the New York Tribune from Chicago says Miss Annetta Flanders died at St. Luke's Hospital Thursday night as the result of acute blood poisoning induced by neglect and lack of medical attendance. And remember, Dowie believed that the medical establishment was evil, and he convinced his followers of this. And that's what's going on here. For over a week prior to her removal to the hospital, she had been attended by Miss Henrika Bratz, a follower of John Alexander Dowie, who excluded physicians and friends from the room. Finally, when death was near at hand, she was taken to the hospital. It was then too late for medical skill to have any effect, however, and Miss Flanders died. Miss Flanders became interested in the doctrines of Dowie, whose hotel and various printing and business houses are conducted under the name Zion. Okay, so he's already gotten rid of the International Divine Healing Association, and now he has called his hotel Zion. So this is before Zion City still, but the hotel that he lived in and that he conducted his affairs in was called Zion. And who is known as the General Overseer of the Christian Catholic Church. 2 weeks ago, she became ill, and when a physician suggested, she insisted that relief should be brought from Zion, and Miss Bratz appeared. Throughout the 3 days that Miss Flanders suffered, Miss Bratz prayed long and fervently. A little girl was born to Miss Flanders, but despite the prayers, Miss Flanders began to fall, and then the woman whose home she shared appeared at the door and with tears in her eyes begged that she might be allowed to administer a bowl of broth or other nourishment to the patient. To this, Miss Bratz only shook her head, and Miss Fraser and her granddaughter were both turned away. The days passed, but Miss Flanders only grew worse, and when she could no longer hear the cries of her babe and draw it to her, the husband, who had remained silent through it all, gave way to his doubts and summoned the doctor. Miss Flanders was then removed to St. Luke's Hospital and died soon after. Miss Bratz insists the patient would have lived had her husband been a believer. And folks, that's the thing about these faith healers. See, what they do is they blame the failure of their healing on you. You either don't have enough faith to believe that you're going to receive your healing, or you lose your healing if you supposedly got a healing and you end up losing it because you didn't have enough faith. But it's always blamed on you, and never does the faith healer take responsibility at all. And that's what happens here. She blames it on the husband. Let's read that again. Miss Flanders was then removed to St. Luke's Hospital and died soon after. Miss Bratz insists the patient would have lived had her husband been a believer. So now, instead of, Miss Flanders had the faith, but her husband didn't, so that's why Miss Flanders died. These people were cruel. They were arrogant. They were, I don't even have words. John A. Barnes of the State Board of Health is investigating and will prosecute. Now, here's something interesting I want to tell you before we close this article, shut this article down and move on. There's another article that I'm not even going to bother with because this is going to be a long video anyway. But there's an article that I saved, a clipping that I saved, that talks about how the Dowieites actually made placards, and put them all over saying that Annetta Flanders would have lived if they wouldn't have taken her to the hospital, if they would have left her in Dowie's care. So Miss Bratz here puts the blame on the husband. The other Dowieites put the blame on the fact that Miss Flanders was taken away from them and taken to the hospital, and that's why she died, because, of course, the medical establishment, they're evil. They don't know what they're doing. So, anyway, that's it for this article. We'll move on. Okay, so here's the next article we're going to be looking at. And again, as you can see, newspapers.com. We are looking at the Sunday Inner Ocean. This is from Chicago, Illinois. And the date is August 13th, 1899. So this is right after the death of Annetta Flanders. And this is the article that I wanted to show you. I talked about earlier about the newspaper reporter who goes and visits the businessman who has his establishment across from Dowie's institution. And he has to run a hearse off. This is an incredibly interesting article. Let's look at it together. We're going to zoom in, and as you can see, the font is pretty smudgy here, as a lot of the old newspaper font is. But let's it's still readable. We can still read it. Is that a word, readable? Anyway, Dowie and his Zion Colony, peculiar institution run by self-styled divine healer in Chicago, cash combined with bodily ills. Private bank in which patients are invited to deposit their money. All right. Here's where we start out. In quotations, do people die in Zion? The question refers to Dr. John Alexander Dowie's institution at the corner of 12th Street and Michigan Avenue, Dowie's Den. A reporter for the Sunday Inner Ocean put the query to a businessman whose office is across the street from the big Dowie home for the halt, the blind, the lame, the insane, the feeble-minded, the consumptive, and the victims of every disease in the category of human ailments. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. There we go. Okay. The businessman shrugged his shoulders and jerked a thumb toward a big window looking out on 12th Street. Quote, "For months," he said, "a hearse stood there at the corner of my building every morning. Every morning the black thing drove up there early and stood in front of my," I'll move down here past the picture, "my window like a hoodoo. 'What do you want around here?' I asked the driver finally. 'Orders from Zion,' he said. 'Well, why don't you move out there in front of the establishment?' I asked. I asked, for the fellow, you see, stopped half a block away and across the street from Dowie's institution. He kept his rig close into the curb so that the center of my building shut off the sight of him from the inmates of the place. 'They won't let me drive up there,' he answered. 'When they get ready, they give a signal, and I drive around the back of their place.'" This is the Apostle Dowie, by the way, that Roberts Liardon calls an apostle, a revivalist, a great man of God. I drove the hearse and the driver off one morning. Not long after that, for the sight of it, every morning was more than I could stand. I think he goes and waits on at the back of their establishment now, but of that I'm not certain. All I know is that I don't care to have my place looking like a morgue, and I ran the undertaker away. Not a funeral, maybe? Well, people in Chicago, whether Zionists or not, don't take pleasure drives in hearses, as far as I know. Excuse me. Still, it may be a practical joke in Zion. I can't swear it isn't. It was claimed that bodies were taken away at night when Mr. Dowie had his sanitarium at 61st Street, remarked the reporter. "Do you know whether anything like that goes on here?" "No, I don't. A dealer near here on 12th Street told me that they were carrying out corpses often at night, but I don't know." The indictment of the two healers from Zion, Miss Henrika Bratz and DeWitt C. Holmes, for illegal practices last week has drawn attention again to Dowie and his alleged divine healing. The case in point is peculiarly pathetic. The absence of medical treatment is said to have caused the death of Miss Annetta Flanders from blood poisoning after suffering terribly for 10 days. Miss Bratz, the healer, declares that this is her first, now look at this, her first misluck in treating similar cases. Some say that instances of misluck are frequent occurrences in the practice of Dowie and his followers. Zionists deny that they minister by temporal means at all. They depend wholly upon cures by the Lord and protest that they are in no way responsible for results. Dr. Dowie has one general warning to his patients, and one only. Now listen to this. "Don't be stingy with your money," he says. "If you do, the Lord may be stingy with his cures." And folks, again, that is the way the faith healers get you. They are not, they could care less about you. I've said it before, I'll say it again. They don't care about you. All they care about is money. Zion, the main institution or infirmary at the corner of 12th Street and Michigan Avenue, is not open to the public. Of course it's not. And especially not to representatives of newspapers. A reporter for the Sunday Inter-Ocean asked, let me move up here, asked to be conducted through the big building as visitors walked through a hospital. "No," said Dr. Spacer, next in authority to Dowie. "What we do here is nobody's business." So you see, remember in the first article, Dowie said the same thing to the reporter who tried to question him. And Spacer, Dowie's right-hand man, says the same exact thing. That this is what they do. They totally avoid any issue. They totally avoid the situation. What we do here is nobody's business. Reporters have no right to come around here investigating what is nobody's affair but our own. Newspapers print only a pack of lies about us. I don't believe editors and reporters know enough to write the truth. Poor things. They can't understand our teachings. What are your methods of healing, doctor? Asked the reporter. We haven't any methods. The Lord heals. He does everything. Now, look here, said the little man, taking a big watch out of his pocket. If this watch gets out of order, where do I take it? To a blacksmith? No, replied the reporter, wishing not to spoil a beautiful illustration. You take it to the maker. Certainly, he replied triumphantly. I go to the Lord for everything I want, and to him only. Then your idea is that the universe is run on the plan of a nickel-plate watch? Queried the reporter. Newspapers and newspaper reporters are run by the devil. And the doctor solemnly, said the doctor solemnly with considerable warmth. Dr. Spacer is Dowie's private secretary, a little thin-faced, black-whiskered man who claims to have been a medical practitioner at one time. He dresses neatly. His manner is mild until he is aroused upon what he calls the persecution of Zion. And that's what Dowie did. Dowie would call any critic someone who persecuted him, just a persecutor of Zion. And that's how he was able to dupe his followers into continuing to follow him and to continue to give him money. Then he pours forth an extraordinary volley of abuse against those who take issue with him. So far as the general public is concerned, any investigation of what goes on at the Dowie Institution is impossible except by means of detectives or detectives' methods. It is shut up as thoroughly as whatever that word is, as isolated as a pest house. No statistics are given out. Hotel, bank, church, land investment, company, printing office, and college are all owned and controlled by Dr. Dowie. What goes on at Zion, or where the immense sums of money go to after they leave the pockets of Dowie converts, is a mystery. Life at Zion apparently does not go on in the rude simplicity of life among the early Christian martyrs whom the Zion elders claim to emulate. The court official who went to subpoena Elder Holmes, accused of illegal practice in the case of Miss Flanders, found him living like a prince. He had a luxurious suite of rooms and was attended by 2 waiting maids, reported the clerk. Now let's look at this little section here called Dowie Lives in Luxury. When Dr. Dowie is not at his summer home at Whitehall, Michigan, he occupies a luxurious suite of apartments at Zion. When Zion was established, the Imperial Hotel was rented, furnished, and the appointments have since been made more splendid. The entrance to the building is an immense lobby, high-ceiled in handsomely carved oak and floored with marble tiling. The big velvet rug covers a large part of it. At the counter, a clerk and assistant are busy, as in the ordinary hotel. To the left is a big dining room with polished floor and shining napery. In front and across the lobby, with windows opening on Michigan Avenue, a private office has been pinned off for Dr. Spacer, the private secretary. It is very handsomely appointed with rugs, pictures, and oak furniture upholstered in leather. In a big room to the left, when the reporter called, one of the elders was holding a clinic. The room was filled with chairs and beds on the order of portable couches. About 25 men and women were sitting and lying about the room. 2 women were evidently in the last stages of consumption. A third was lame. One man had his head bound up in a, looks like muslin and cotton. Another looked about with the vacant stare of an idiot. The elder was sitting in an armchair, holding a Bible in his hand, and giving a general talk to the effect that God was the only healer, that he made everything, did everything, and that the necessary requirement for being cured of disease was to get a blessing, in quotations here. A burly fellow in courtery guarded the double doors which were open. "May I go in?" asked the reporter. "Are you a member of Zion?" asked the reporter. "No." "Can't get in then," he said. And the reporter stood for a considerable time taking a survey of the room, listening to the doctrine. Zion will accommodate about 350 people. It is a big brick building, 7 stories high. Prices for board and treatment, which consist of advice to read the Bible and pray, run from $15 a week up to any sum the patient will pay. Up to any sum the patient will pay. The home is nearly always full, and the profits from the source alone are said to be enormous. "There is in the Zion house now," remarked a merchant in the neighborhood, "a man named Heritage, a farmer from Indiana. Heritage sold his farm and all his earthly possessions and came up to Chicago to live in Zion. He expects to be a missionary. His entire family, wife, and children are with him. Now, I don't know how this case will turn out, but I will bet dollars to donuts it goes like a lot of others I've noticed. He puts his money in Zion Bank, he lives at the hotel, and that costs a good deal. He contributes a lot to Zion in various ways because he's afraid not to. Pretty soon, his money gives out. He is sent somewhere in the backwoods as a missionary or simply thrown out into the street. Is the man sick? No. And all of his family are well. He's simply crazy on the subject of Zion." All right. So we're going to look at a story now that is still in this article that is told by a patient. A woman who spent a week at Zion Home describes it not very prepossessing in not very prepossessing terms. "I went there for deafness," she said, "as a last resort. I got no relief, and at the end of the week I left because I thought I saw pretty clearly into Dr. Dowie's methods. And I can't endure the motley crew that thronged the place." Now, she's going to talk here, about Dowie's attitude towards his quote-unquote patients here. His victims is what I like to call them. But there were patients suffering from contagious diseases, 10 insane people, some of them violent, cases of epilepsy, consumption, cancer. Very conceivable disorder was housed. Every conceivable disorder was housed promiscuously under one roof. Nearly all of the patients were from the very lowest classes, ignorant and uneducated. Dr. Dowie's method was to bully his patients into a state of abject submission. This is the Apostle Dowie. This is the one that Roberts Liardon calls apostle. He was abusive, and he demanded submission from his followers. The majority of them, too, were awed by his evident prosperity, his riches, his carriages, his broadcloth clothes, and silk hat. Once a day, Dowie collected his patients in a lecture room and harangued them on the necessity of reading the Bible, told them that it was the only possible way to get well, combining Bible reading with that is to say with contributions to Zion. And this is her quoting Dowie. "No better today, sir?" Dowie would thunder at a deliberate cancer subject or a patient with epilepsy. "Well, sir, if you are not better, look at this, it is your own fault. There it is right there, coming from the mouth of Dowie himself. Well, sir, if you are not better, it is your own fault. You either don't trust in the Lord or else you are concealing some infamous crime, sir. All right, we're going to have to move on to the next page here. So this is what he says. He says, out with it, I believe is what it's going to say here. Let me just, out with it. How many widows and orphans have you robbed? You sneak out and guzzle beer, or else you are a dirty tobacco fiend. And Dowie was, of course, against tobacco and alcohol. Don't you tell me, sir, I know. After an impromptu talk, Dowie went from one patient to another, laid his hands on them for a second, muttered a prayer of some sort, and the treatment for the day was over. Once in a while, somebody got what they called a blessing. Frankly, to outward appearances, they were the same sick people after the blessing as before. Still, the news of the blessing soon spread through the establishment and infused hope into the others who hadn't received one. People were coming and going all the time. Not very many stayed long. Stories of miraculous cures were circulated all the time in Zion, but I never witnessed a cure. I used to watch Dowie opening his mail in the mornings. The amount of money he received in letters was enormous. Nearly every letter had money in it. He would pile the money in a heap on one side and the letters on the other. He read very few of the letters and paid no attention to them at all unless they contained money. Well, we could go on and on here, but it's just the article's just a little too long here, so we're gonna stop right there. But doesn't that sound familiar? Remember what the big bust of Robert Tilton, where they found the prayer request that people sent him in the dumpster behind his building? So, I mean, this is all the same. Again, this is faith healers do not care about you. They don't care about you at all. All they care about is your money. So that's this article here. And now we're going to look at an article about Miss Wilmington Judd, who died under Dowie's care. Okay, so here we are. We're going to look at the final article, newspapers.com. We're looking at the Chicago Daily Tribune. All right, and the date is Friday, May 17th, 1901. So we went from 1894 to 1895 to 1899, and now we're in 1901. And here is the article. Dowie pictures a death scene. This is the story about Miss H.W. Judd, and the details in this story are really disturbing. Not only because of the details of her death, that's disturbing enough, but also because of how Dowie responds to the death of Miss Judd and how her husband responds to the death. And you can tell, just like the Bible says, that the consciences of these false teachers, that those consciences are sealed as with a hot iron, Paul says. Dowie is just callous, just a very callous man. And again, I just want to reiterate, this is the guy who's called an apostle by Roberts Liardon. People, I mean, just blows my mind. So let's look at the article here. Okay. Head of Zion callously relates to Coroner Traeger, how Miss H.W. Judd expired in agony. Prays as victim writhes. Husband of woman also tells in detail how she suffered under treatment of the healers. Doors barred to doctors. While carriers hawked the Leaves of Healing, that was Dowie's periodical, his magazine, his newspaper, whatever you want to call it, before the door of the undertaking rooms at 22 Adams Street, Dr. John Alexander Dowie and his Zion faced a coroner's jury yesterday afternoon. It was the inquiry into the death of Miss H. Worthington Judd, who with her newly born infant was added on Sunday to the victims of Dowieism after suffering 16 hours without medical attendance. And yes, her infant died as well. Even in this dealing with death, the spirit of commercialism dominated. And at the inquest, every effort was made to sound the glories of Zion. Clad in clothes of black, lined with silk, his feet encased in patent leather shoes, Dowie whirled up in his carriage to be received by the men of his Zion guards. And that's something else, too. This guy had an entourage that he traveled with. And he had guards all around him. And as I've read newspaper articles where Dowie has visited New York and other places, and where he spoke in, he spoke in Madison Square Gardens, and he was just this pomp guy, just with this huge entourage of followers. It was just crazy. He's like a king. His every word was made the object of applause. Even the husband of the dead woman paid praise to his power. Folks, this guy was not an apostle. He was a cult leader. He was the leader of the Zionist movement, the cult of Zion. I mean, that's what he was. And again, Liardon calls him an apostle, and it's unbelievable. Dying request would not avail. Would you have refused? Now listen to this, okay? The reporter's asking, or the one who's questioning is asking the husband if he would have refused the wife any medical attention. Listen to his answer. Would you have refused the dying request of your wife had she asked that a physician be summoned? Was asked of disciple Judd, husband of the victim and general manager of the Zion Land and Investment Association. Yes, sir, I would, came the answer. I would have known that she was not in her right mind had she made such a request. This was the keynote to the defense for not calling medical aid. Now listen to what Dowie says. Doctors, they and medicine are of no use at all. The farther away they are, the better, snapped Dr. Dowie in his turn. Without the slightest apparent show of feeling, Judd, the husband, told the coroner's jury how death had relieved his wife's agony after 16 hours of suffering marked by convulsions. He told how he had offered prayer for her, how Dr. Dowie had prayed for her relief at a call by telephone during the night, and then had gone back to his bed. So, this is just one version of the story, but other versions that give a little more detail, and it may be this one, I'm not sure, we'll see, but I do remember reading several stories from different newspapers about this incident, or several newspaper articles about this incident, and I believe that Dowie goes to bed, but he does come to the bedside of Miss Judd right around 11 o'clock in the next day and prays for her. So, but he does go to bed. I mean, look at it. He goes right back to bed with as much emotion as if he were commenting on the weather. The man told how he held his wife in her bed to prevent her from breaking her arms in the delirium of pain. He even held a cloth between her teeth to keep her from biting her tongue. The only aid extended to her had been prayer. Prayer by himself, by Deacon Spacer, by Dr. Dowie, by other ordained officials of the Christian Catholic Church in Zion. Dowie in flippant mood. With a smile and in a sharp voice, as if he were preaching a sermon to his faithful, Dowie himself told his story. He spoke braggingly of his carriage, of his personal attendance, of the fact that his horses had carried him over the 6 miles from Zion to the Judd home in 30 minutes. He joked about his age, laughed as he gave jocular description of how his followers kept their health because they don't believe in secret societies and ride goats. Dr. Judd, too, sought to explain the beliefs of Dowieism. Interrupted once by a juror, he said with a smile to General Overseer Dowie, "Why, we would just as soon give a lesson now on divine healing, wouldn't we?" When the afternoon's inquiry had concluded, it was held by attorneys present that an opening for the law had been made. If those present at the bedside of Miss Judd knew that she was in imminent danger of death for any considerable length of time, said Assistant State's Attorney Blair, after looking up the laws, there may be ground for criminal action. Dr. Dowie himself admitted that the woman was in critical condition when he visited her. Mr. Judd asserted his belief that his wife was ill unto death. The inquiry was memorable for another fact. For the first time since he had set up his banners, John Alexander Dowie had been served with a subpoena and had been charged to give testimony concerning the death of one of his followers. For the first time, too, he admitted that prayer and Dowie are not the cure-alls for every disease. He denied, however, that the aid of doctors was invoked. But of course, we have trained nurses, he admitted under vigorous questioning. They are needed to give aid. This much Dr. Dowie never before had admitted. By the elders and the evangelists who have just renounced the church and flayed the general overseer as a fraud and a deceiver, his absolute faith in himself is said to be but one of the material props of which Dowie makes use. Subpoenas were served on Dowie and Deacon Spacer shortly before noon after detectives King and McKenna had haunted Zion for 5 days. When he was whirled up in a carriage with a white dove as its armorial bearing 2 hours later before Ralston's undertaking establishment, he was at once surrounded by men of the Zion Guards. At his heels came his Scotch gillie, Robertson. In the basement room, he was surrounded by his supporters who claimed the greater part of the space. Coroner Traeger personally assisted Deputy Coroner Buckley. State's Attorney Deenan was represented by Assistant State's Attorney Elliott, while Attorneys George J. Tobias acted as the coroner's special counsel. Room for my stenographer and clerks, Dowie commanded. These functionaries were stowed away, and then the general overseer took his place near his attorney, Thomas W. Packard, and Mr. Judd. Victim's husband tells a story, and this is where it really gets gruesome here, as if it hasn't been gruesome enough. Judd was called at once. His appearance is that of a well-to-do businessman. His statement was long, being in part as follows. My wife, this is the article that talks about Dowie coming in and visiting at 11 o'clock the next day. So, my wife complained last Sunday night about 11:30 o'clock of having pain in her. Let me move up to the top here. Well, let's see. Now I got to find it. Continued on the 5th page. All right, so let's move over. Page 2, page 3, page 4, and page 5. Sorry about that, folks. Whoops. Back here. So there it is. Okay, there's the continuation of the article. So she's complaining about her stomach at about 11:30. She said, "I'd like to have you pray for me," a request which she had made many times before. I prayed for her and asked God to heal her and take away that pain. She got some relief, but felt the pain in another part of the body, in her side. I prayed for her again. I asked God to take away the pain. Then my wife told me the pain went around to her back. I asked her what I should do, if I should ask Dr. Dowie to pray for her. She said yes. That was between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. I telephoned to the Zion home. I think it was Deacon Stern. Dowie shook his head, and Judd promptly kept Stern's name out of the inquiry. Dowie's even controlling the guys right there in court. He delivered the message to Dr. Dowie, continued the witness. I then found my wife still suffering. We thought the pain was caused by, I think that's pleurisy. The nurse she wanted, Miss Spacer, mother of Dr. Spacer, came between 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning. We prayed for her. Sometime later, my wife's eyes opened wide, became set, and she said, "Oh, my eyes." I asked her if she knew me, but those were her last words. She was immediately taken with convulsions. Then we noticed the blood running from her mouth. It was almost impossible to hold her in bed, but I held her. Woman writhes, men pray. After the second convulsion, she went almost immediately into another. During the last convulsion, Overseer W. Hammond Piper and Elder Faulkner came into the room. They are ministers of the Christian Catholic Church. Prayer was offered for her that the blood would stop flowing. It was then gushing from her mouth. Then a telephone message was sent to Dr. Dowie. As the eyes of the audience turned on the overseer, he stroked his perfumed beard with satisfaction. When the doctor came, she was still unconscious and suffering from the last spasm. The man continued. He prayed that she might have deliverance. He prayed again, and then said that she would be all right. In the meantime, the blood was still flowing from her mouth. This was about 11:30 on Sunday morning. I stood over my wife from that time, holding a cloth between her teeth. I also held the claws to catch the blood which was gushing from her mouth. I think that's 3:20. On 3:20 on Sunday afternoon, the death pallor crept over her forehead, and I knew that all was over. Just then Deacon Spacer came in. "What about the immediate removal of the body?" asked Deputy Coroner Buckley. "I didn't want the funeral held from the house because I knew the curious nature of the neighbors," was Judd's answer. "I knew that wouldn't do us any good. I talked with Deacon Spacer. He suggested that the body be taken to an undertaking shop." All right, under fire of questions. Here Coroner Traeger assumed control. He elicited statements that until 4 years ago, the family had resorted to medicine and physicians. He learned, too, that there were 3 children ranging in ages from 16 to 12 years. "Why was not a physician summoned at the expected birth of your 4th child?" demanded the coroner. "Because I have taken God as my healer, and my wife had done the same." "Mr. Judd, what made you change your mind? Whose questions influenced you? Or whose suggestions, I should say, influenced you?" The witness fenced with this question. He refused to charge Dowie, but insisted that his wife had had a good deal to do with it. "I changed my mind from what I had read in the Word of God and what I had been taught," he returned finally. "By whom were you taught?" "By John Alexander Dowie and ministers of the Christian Catholic Church," came the reply. "You believe that Dowie would pray and heal your wife?" I thought his prayer would have more effect. Often when our prayers have failed, he has prayed and God has most always answered. Yes, this case evidently was an exception. "How long did your wife suffer?" "From 11:30 Saturday night until 3:20 Sunday afternoon. About 16 hours then," said Deputy Coroner Buckley. "Less than that. Now listen to this. This is Dowie breaking in here. Less than that. About 15 hours, broke Dowie, his eyes flashing. As if that mattered. 1 hour difference. Even so, Mr. Judd then asserted that his wife was conscious and responsible, though in pain part of the time. Did she at any time ask for medical aid? No. Did you at any time suggest it? No. She had repeatedly informed me that she did not want a physician. Every care was taken by Dowie's attorney to see that this statement was entered. We have no medicines in the house. We have had no medicines in the house in over 4 years, continued Mr. Judd, nor has a physician been at the house in that time. Did it ever occur to you that for humanity's sake, in your duty as a husband, you should have furnished medical assistance? Not for an instant, came the answer. You were ready to stand there and see your wife suffer? Yes, sir. I was carrying out her will. Would you have given her poison had she asked for it? No. If she had asked you to send for a physician, would you have done so? No, sir, I wouldn't have sent. I would have known she was not in her right mind. For 4 years, my wife and I have trusted in God Almighty, and our prayers have been answered in a number of cases. You say if your wife had asked for a physician, you would not have summoned one, broke in juror A.R. Ford. No, sir, came the defiant reply. Now we're going to look at Dowie on the stand. Here Dr. Dowie insisted on being called. His horses were becoming restless, even though the groom trotted them up and down the street. He brushed off his shirt front, dotted by a pearl stud, and then defined his occupation as minister of the gospel. Dowie was no minister of the gospel. Dowie was a minister of death, that is for sure. Minister of the gospel, general overseer of the Christian Catholic Church in Zion. His story of the case was, and so you can see how the newspaper curls here, so it's kind of difficult to get some of these words. His story of the case was, I think, that shortened by his frequent assertions that Deacon Judd's testimony was substantially what had been told him. At 4 o'clock on the morning of Sunday last, Dowie said, I was awakened by my personal attendant, who informed me that a telephonic message had been received from Deacon Judd saying that his wife was suffering from severe pains and asking me to pray for her. I earnestly prayed for her and then again returned to rest. Dowie then told of how another communication had been received about 8:30 on Sunday morning, and how he had sent Spacer and Faulkner to the house. At 11 o'clock, the former telephoned that the woman was in serious condition. I at once ordered my carriage, said Dowie. Exactly at 11 o'clock, I left my house, reaching the Judd residence in 30 minutes, a distance of nearly 6 miles. Let me move up here. I saw Miss Judd. I found her well attended, 2 of our maternity deaconesses being there. She was unconscious during my stay. I saw blood on a small cloth which they had between her teeth. I questioned about this, and the deaconesses assured that Miss Judd had bitten her tongue and caused the blood to flow. I was a little doubtful as to this answer. I placed my hand on her breast and prayed as I have done millions of times. I believe in the name of the Lord Jesus and the power of the Holy Spirit, and in accordance with the will of God, the Heavenly Father, that He would mercifully deliver her. The prayer was so far answered that she became comparatively quiet. A few moments later, I saw the patient again. There was little blood on the cloth, which was in her mouth. and beyond a few uneasy motions of the body, it was evident she was not in much pain. Yes, that was my opinion. I then left, informing Deacon Judd that I would send Overseer Spacer in the afternoon. That's all I know, except that I was told by Overseer Spacer that when he arrived, she had departed this life. Did you consider her seriously ill? Demanded the coroner. Yes. Did you expect her to die? No, sir. When I left, I had high hopes of her recovery. These nurses, they are regularly licensed midwives? I don't know. They were competent. You made no attempt to ascertain Miss Judd's physical condition. Continued the coroner. Not the slightest, was the answer. I am not a physician, and I never attempt to act as one. Have your maternity nurses faith in God and prayer? Yes. Then experience isn't necessary? Dowie hesitated. Then in suave tones, yes, experience would be necessary. We would require experience. Do any of your people ever call in physicians or administer medicines? Never. I advise against it. I am absolutely against doctors and drugs. I advise all members never to have anything to do with doctors and drugs. Yes, I advise against surgery. You are an old man, doctor, began the coroner. Oh, no, I am not an old man, laughed the head of Zion. I'm only 54. Well, in that time, haven't you ever found it necessary to call a surgeon? Never. I never found such a case. I don't believe such a case exists. I advise against it. Didn't Miss Judd need medical attendance? No, sir, not at all. Wow. The further away, the better, he snapped, showing anger at the coroner's persistency. I have no use at all for medicine or surgeons. They are a great hindrance. No, sir, I do not have a physician for my family. And by the way, his own daughter died as well, and Dowie's prayers didn't help that situation at all either. No, sir, I don't have a physician for my family. For 37 years, I have had nothing to do with doctors. I was cured by prayer when dying. For 21 years, my wife has had nothing to do with doctors. As to Miss Judd's case, hers was different from any other I have ever seen in this country. What, in your opinion, was the cause of death? I should say she had a burst of blood vessel. It might have been in the brain or in the stomach. As to our faith, now I say that we believe in prayer because God declares, I am the Lord thy healer. Because from Genesis to Revelation, there are promises that he is the forgiver of our sins, healer of our sicknesses, and we have found him so. The deaths in Zion have been 3 in 1,000 and less. This is due to good living. We don't drink, smoke, go to theaters, don't gamble, and don't eat pig. Dowie smiled, and his followers laughed loudly. We don't go to secret societies and don't ride goats. We live decent, sensible lives. There was another roar of laughter, and then in the softest tones, flicking either hand with his silk handkerchief, Dowie said, May I go, Mr. Coroner? I am always at your service. I did not receive my subpoena until almost noon. I have not in any way sought to evade service. I was exceedingly glad to come. I want to tell all I know. I thank you for your courtesy. In the meantime, Undertaker Henry E. Haggard was seeking to explain why he had removed the body without legal permit. So there it is again. It's just a habit. This is what they do. And Dowie can say there were only 3 deaths. I've got newspaper article after newspaper article on different people who have died there. So that was a lie. The inquest on Miss Judd's death will be continued next Thursday, 2 p.m., when former Elder Stokes and others have been renounced, who have renounced Dowieism and charged that he can effect no cures, will be among those who will give evidence. And he did. He had several people leave, and they went on testimony in the newspapers that Dowie was a fraud. And of course, we all know that in 1906, he's going to be exposed as a fraud. All of his mishandling of funds is going to be laid out in the open. The mistresses that he had, the teachings on polygamy, all of these things are out there in the open. And that happened in, I believe, 1906, right before Parham came to Zion, Charles Fox Parham, who was himself a Dowieite. Should we read any more? Yeah, because there's only this one section here. Might as well look at the anger of the coroner here. Removal makes coroner angry. When Coroner Traeger learned in the morning that the body of Miss Christensen had been removed from Zion home regardless of his explicit command to Undertaker Haggard, he was angry. Now, I'm not sure if this is a totally different... I think this is referring to another death. Oh, yes, Miss Christensen, by the way, was a lady who had been burned in a fire. And she went to the Dowie home because she was a Dowieite. She believed she was a disciple of John Alexander Dowie. And she wanted nothing to do with a hospital. And she died of burns there in the Dowie home. She wasn't healed at all, even though Dowie prayed for her. And she wouldn't even take Vaseline for her burns because she was afraid there might be medicine in the Vaseline. And so that's who Miss Christensen is. So, remove the body of Miss Christensen. Had been removed from Zion home regardless of his explicit command to Undertaker Haggard. He was angry. Haggard, it seems, called on the coroner and was told that he must secure an order from Miss Christensen before the body had been removed, as the county official would not recognize a certificate of death signed by Spacer. The Undertaker asserts he secured the order and, not deeming it necessary to see the coroner again, went to Zion and removed the body to his undertaking rooms. And I'm not sure why this article switched from Miss Judd to Miss Christensen. Maybe this was an article from another part of the paper. But I don't think so, because it looks like, just like the rest of them, it has the little headings there at top. So we'll just keep reading to see where we go. I have read this article through. I just can't remember why this portion about Miss Christensen is in here. Yesterday morning, but you can see that, Dowie tried to remove the body without anyone knowing it. Yesterday morning, Deputy Coroner Buckley summoned a jury and went to Haggard's to view the body. The hearing will begin next Tuesday afternoon at Rolston's Undertaking Rooms, 22 Adams Street. Dr. M.O. Heckard, who has charge of the burial permits, says he will endeavor to see that the law is enforced against Haggard. And that looks to be it. So yeah, that's it. Anyway, so this is this was a gruesome tale, a gruesome story, and it just shows you just the absolute callousness of Dowie and even his followers, and it's a very, very sad story. Well, as you just saw, Dowie was no apostle at all, and yet that's what Roberts Liardon calls him in his book, God's Generals. So if Liardon doesn't tell us the truth about General Number 1, John Alexander Dowie, how can we believe that he's telling us the truth about the rest of the generals in his book? So we're going to investigate these generals ourselves. We're going to take a look at each general, and we're going to see whether or not their ministry was legitimate. Are these men and women really God's generals, or are they frauds and liars? I'm convinced that they're frauds and liars. Now, we've already looked at John G. Lake. I've done 2 videos on him showing him to be a fraud. And in the next video, we're going to talk once more about John Alexander Dowie. But what I'm going to try to do in the next video is I'm going to try to show you that Dowie had a huge influence on the modern faith healing movement. There is a connection between the modern faith healers of today and John Alexander Dowie, and I want to try to show you that connection in the next video. Until then, thank you so much for watching. I hope that this video/podcast has been helpful and informative to you. Lord willing, I'll see you soon.